Hello and welcome to the latest Redwoods Dowling Kerr webinar. Today I'm joined by the lovely Ruth Pimentel from Kindred Nurseries and Jenna Caldwell from Redwoods Dowling Kerr. Ruth, if you'd like to do yourself a quick introduction, please.
Hi there, everyone. Nice that you said the lovely Ruth and not the lovely Jenna. Jenna is also. I noticed that as well. Anyway, hi there. I'm Ruth. I've had my rollers in specially to make my hair look good for the webinar. I'm the CEO at Kindreds Nurseries. I'm teacher by background years ago, and then more recently I was the CEO at Toad Hall before moving to Kindred.
Thank you. And the fabulous Jenna?
Oh, fabulous. Yes, I'm Jenna Caldwell. I am the Director of Childcare and Education for Redwoods Dowling Kerr, and I have been here for 7 years now.
Thank you very much. Okay, so anybody who's new to the webinar, on the box on your screen there is the facility to ask questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them from now onwards. I won't be using names, so they will be in confidence. Some of you have already submitted questions which have been built into the webinar today, but in about 20-25 minutes time we will go to a Q&A session. So first question of the day for Ruth. How has Kindred been impacted by the COVID-19 crisis?
So obviously, you know, in the new coronavirus, we stepped into the unknown with many providers that will be on this webinar today. I've often said this, but I looked for the handbook on COVID-19 and it wasn't on Amazon and it wasn't on the shelf. So we were very much thinking on our feet. And initially there was a real sense of concern for the staff, for the families and for the children, ploughing through all the guidance, trying to glean as much information as possible in order to lead and manage through a pandemic. How have we been impacted? Well, we've found new ways of working. We've obviously had to, as I said earlier, think on our feet, look at how we do things differently. Some things better, some things obviously not as good, and some things just differently. And obviously the financial implications that many people will know about has had and will continue to have an impact.
So what actions have you and Kindred taken to try and mitigate the situation?
Well, along with many providers, it was reading and assimilating all the guidance and then looking at the risk assessments. Where were the risks? How did we need to manage those risks? And obviously with the help of the group of providers that all came together, looking at the standard operational procedures that were put out as a guide, which was incredibly helpful. And then, you know, implementing what we felt would work for the Kindred nurseries, for our staff, for our children and our families. And I think, you know, the one thing which is so clear in this is it isn't one size fits all. And even within our group, there are very different nurseries in very different locations with different setups. So each one had to be considered in their own right, and an operational plan for each of those, which we're constantly reviewing in line with new guidance or new things that we find out about, or just feedback from staff and parents and listening to the children.
And so specifically, what operational changes have you implemented?
Well, this is when we do our clever thing, isn't it, Andrew, that we practiced earlier. So we did, do you remember? Oh, there we go. So we started by really trying to simplify the message and make sure that we had a clear set of principles that would keep us all safe. So we pulled together a poster which acts really as a guide and a tool, I think, for us all to use, just to remember about all the things that are going to help us at the moment, and these are known to everyone, but it was just really helpful for us all to put that down as the 7 key principles and simple little icons, and make sure they're up in the nurseries, but obviously linked to all those are all the things that we feel will keep the risks reduced, and I don't need to repeat them, you can all see them there.
Okay, the slide that we just put up is actually available on your screens as a handout if you click on the handout section. So operationally, you've obviously reinforced the messages, you've drawn together your processes, you've put together your marketing literature. What other operational changes have you had to roll out to mitigate the position?
Well, we obviously worked with our bubbles, you know, which everybody now talks about bubbles, and now obviously we're slowly popping our bubbles and thinking about how it looks when it's, you know, relaxed a little bit, and we're doing it cautiously, and we're, you know, wherever possible, just making sure we use common sense. And
what factors go into the thought process of whether you're going to pop a bubble?
Well, it's really important for me, and interestingly, I've had an email this morning from a small preschool talking, you know, about what to do in terms of relaxing, because we're nervous, aren't we? Because through the crisis, we became quite dependent on the government giving us guidelines, and now as it starts to relax, I think we all feel it in probably in our own lives as well. As you know, lockdown, it was quite straightforward. When we were in lockdown, we knew that we had to stay where we are, but when you try and relax things a bit, it all becomes a little more complicated. So what we're trying to do is think about, you know, what would the impact be if we started to relax the bubbles and put children in different groupings. And the ultimate test is always going to be, should you have a case, should it be positive, what is the impact going to be? So how is that going to be controlled, working obviously with the authorities, with Public Health England and what have you, but how would you actually cope if you had to close down a large group, or, you know, even the nursery? So I think it's thinking about that. So that's what I say, it depends on how your building is organised, it depends on how your staffing is organised. It's going to be very personal, I think, to each setting, but at the end of the day, it's how would you manage should you have to isolate or self-isolate a larger group of children and staff.
And do you feel there's been enough government support and advice at the right times for the childcare sector?
Oh, that's a bit further down our list, isn't it? So, I mean, an interesting question. Has there been enough? There's been a huge amount of government guidance, and keeping up with that government guidance and remembering where you'd read it and what it said has been a real challenge, I think. And you know, I mentioned earlier, but the group, a particular COVID group that I've been lucky enough to be a part of, that's been invaluable, just to make people connect and talk to one another and discuss and debate and remember where documents were and how it would be interpreted. So there has been a lot of government guidance. The support, I mean, there have been a raft of initiatives announced, and huge numbers of those, and thinking through the implications for us as a business is still ongoing. You know, the furlough scheme, the flexible furlough, all of those initiatives, they need a lot of thinking and a lot of planning.
Okay, so if we switch now to the staff focus, talk to us about how you've used the government schemes such as furlough and then obviously flexible furlough from an operational point of view and a business point of view.
Yeah, because I can't compete with Harmajinder, because he knew everything. Any of those lucky enough to be on his webinar, he was amazing. So don't ask me technical details about the intricacies of the scheme. But yeah, I mean, obviously we made use of furlough to ensure that we got our staff safe as quickly as we possibly could. During that time, what was really interesting is things that we'd had sort of sitting almost in the background really came to the fore. So we've always had a Facebook group for our staff, which we call Team News, and that actual Facebook group became a real tool for us to communicate with staff throughout furlough and keep them engaged. And we had some, really good feedback from staff about that and how we set certain initiatives throughout. We had an International Dance Day. We had the Smile Challenge, which was encouraging people to get out and about and post how many steps they've done. And we had challenges about seeing how far we could walk as a team. So we kept quite a good virtual team spirit going through Team News. And also, with the staff, another thing which we started before all of this was the PANCO programme, which is a qualification actually to look at the physical and nutritional well-being of staff and children. So we'd got a PANCO champion in each of the nurseries, and during lockdown they were able to continue with that qualification and then use some of that learning when thinking about coming back. So we made use of furlough. We've obviously been bringing people back off furlough. There are still people that are on furlough as we sort of manage their different needs, and we're looking at how the flexible furlough will work as we also gather information about occupancy. So this is the challenge, I think, for many of us, is knowing what the occupancy is and how you match it with the furlough. I'm going to stop there because you're desperate.
Okay, no, I think one other thing I guess to bring into the debate, and it's the same in our business, is the technological advancements. So I feel like we've jumped forward 5 years, just the sheer webinar concept for one. Now I'm aware you run a virtual nursery training academy. Would you like to share with the audience?
We were about to have typical a physical training academy that was linked to our head office. It's set up beautifully. It's like a nursery, and that's thanks to our head of operations, Annie. She's worked her magic on that. So we've got a lovely learning space. And actually now it's thinking, well, actually Zoom and Teams and all those other tools that we've used, even Facebook to some extent, have actually proved to be incredibly valuable. We've had remote managers meetings, we've had remote Senko meetings, we've had cluster meetings, and there is something missing, definitely, that you miss all the relationship building, the incidental chat, actually seeing people face to face. But on the plus side, we get everybody there. It's a efficient 2 hours use of time, and they don't have to get on transport. They don't have to leave their nurseries. They can engage with it virtually, and I don't think we'll ever lose that. I think that's something that will stay. And what we're now seriously considering is being able to do a lot more training and do it virtually and make use of a wonderful backdrop of our training academy.
I think, Ruth, we've just had a question actually on this very topic, and the question says, how do Kindred nurseries, how have Kindred nurseries supported learning at home for children and parents?
Yes, so again, nifty footwork. We had recently done a new website, and we built into that something called Inspiration Corner. And Inspiration Corner was where we actually put up some videos. Some of our staff shone through and were very keen to be reading stories, doing activities, singing songs. So they went up on Inspiration Corner and we had great feedback, lots of top tips for parents, lots of activities. So they've been able to engage with that. We've had a weekly newsletter for parents as well, which has gone out and signposted people to things they could be doing, and set up actual events. So we've had the Tiger Who Came to Tea, we've had you know, different events actually on Facebook that parents could join, and that got a really good response as well. So there's definitely a blend that will come out of this, a blend of things, I think, to support families that we've seen has a real benefit.
Okay, thank you. Now, for the next couple of minutes, we should discuss the gritty side of what we've all been through and what we are going through, which is obviously the financial side. Now, employers, nurseries, parents, everybody really has been impacted from a financial point of view. Would you like to offer your insight into the strategy that you've adopted with regards to the financial impact of COVID?
Yeah, I mean, we know that, we knew right at the start that this was a time when it was unheard of, but you know, whatever people were saying, you couldn't think about the finances in the same way. You couldn't think about how the performance of each nursery was going to be. You had to make sure you were putting the needs of your children, your staff and the parents first, which, you know, is probably for many of us quite a comfortable place, because we're always used to putting children first, but you couldn't rely on your usual key performance indicators that you would to manage a business. So it felt quite liberating actually in a way, but it was also nerve-wracking. So one of the decisions that I made, and I've said this before on other forums, is actually the current situation is your best investment in marketing. If you get it right, if you get your messaging right about what you're doing over this period, I believe that will stand nurseries in really good stead going forward. So some of the things we did was obviously the fees debate was a real tricky one to start with, and were we going to charge fees for parents that weren't going to be there, was a really hard one. And of course, you know, that was made all the harder when originally we thought we'd get furlough and we'd be able to receive our local authority funding, and then there was a little bit of a U-turn on that one, by which time we'd already made the decision that we weren't going to be charging fees to parents. So that felt a bit disingenuous from the government, if I'm honest. You know, I probably may have made different decisions, but we decided we would be really flexible, and we still are. We're trying to build confidence with parents, make them feel like they want to dip their toe in the water of getting back into childcare. So whereas previously we may have been stricter with the types of sessions they could have or the days they could attend, we're trying to be much more flexible just to encourage them back in. And
do you think there's a big confidence factor at play, Ruth, with parents?
Oh, definitely. You know, there are some that were more than happy to step straight back into childcare, because, you know, just as I've said about nurseries, we're all in different places. As families, we're all in different places as well, aren't we, in terms of, you know, jobs and careers and financial stability and location and all of that. There's a lot going on there. And for some parents, it was an easy decision. They felt very comfortable with it. But there were a big group of parents who needed to feel that confidence, and were rightly very nervous dropping their children off at the start. But we did a lot of work beforehand. So we actually, the operational team put together a More About Me document, which was an opportunity for parents to talk to us about what their child had been doing, because things may have changed for them. They may have different interests. They may have had different experiences in lockdown. So we collected that information. I think that was the first step to making parents aware we were listening to them. And then we actually spoke to them and talked to them about what to expect when they arrived at the nursery. And then we've also followed up with them since, which I think they've really appreciated, because as we all know, you need people to tell you if you're getting it right. You can't just assume you are. So managers have spoken to parents and gathered their views and taken feedback, which we've all reflected on to see how we can do things differently, and and learn from them. We've encouraged, which has a double whammy, we've encouraged them to put reviews on day nurseries, so that's been great, because a lot of them have actually popped on there that they felt confident going back. And also on family, there's the news feed. I am talking a lot, Andrew. You can
it's
interrupt.
fine, honestly, it's fine. It's giving, Jenna's enjoying this.
And say, will you stop talking again?
It's fine, carry on.
But family, the software that we use, its original sort of concept was about parent communication, and we found that really useful to start with, because on the news feed you could see parents commenting. So you'd got parents that had sent their child back and parents that were thinking about sending their child back, and they could hear the parents that had say, actually it was a really great experience and my child had a lovely day. And that then built a bit more confidence as well. So yeah, okay, confidence is a really big thing.
So we've covered the back, we've covered what's happened, we've covered the practices and the operational changes which you guys have put into play. I guess if we look forward to the remainder of 2020, when we spoke earlier, you were talking about 2-week blocks. Would you like to cover off your expectations for the remainder of 2020?
Well, yes, this is the question they asked me before, when I could look. Well, yeah, could I look in my crystal ball? So I gave it a polish, and when it came back, our expectation is, at the minute, occupancies are creeping up. They're not jumping up, they're creeping up, and I think they will continue to creep up. I am expecting a little flurry, as I think many people will, towards the end of August, beginning of September. In some of our settings, we always get a bit of a last-minute rush come September, when people realise that they may want to put their child in nursery for the new term. But I'm expecting, as furlough comes to an end, as parents may have to go back to work, I'm expecting families to start looking at that point for places. So I'm expecting in September for there to be a gradual ramp up until Christmas. But, and the big but is, it all depends on how, as a country, we move over the next few weeks with everything relaxing, and how frequent these local lockdowns might be, and the news on the second wave, and obviously winter's approaching. So yeah, there is still some things in there that are making me slightly cautious. As a bit of a benchmark, and I'm sure others will be the same, if we can be at 50% occupancy in September, that feels like a good place to be.
And do you see that level of occupancy now by way of bookings, confirmed children starting?
Yeah, we're getting close. We're getting close. Okay.
You've half answered a question. You've half answered a question, so I'll finish the question off. When do you expect to get back to normal levels?
Well, I don't expect 2020-21 academic year to be at the same occupancies as previous years. I'm expecting that potentially to be 10% down. I think we're going to see it ramp up. These are crystal ball numbers. You did tell me to look in my crystal ball, and I think I do expect it to, to build up, but it will be very location specific. There will be locations that will do really well, and there will be others, you never know. There might be a local employer that, decides they're not going to open their doors. There may be other scenarios going on that are out of our control.
Okay, I think if we sort of take the debate broader now, and you are allowed to use the F word, can you give the audience your thoughts on the challenges which are facing the childcare sector?
What, the F word?
Funding.
Oh, I didn't know if it was funding or furlough. No. Funding or furlough. I've forgotten the question. I was so confused.
Your thoughts on the challenges facing the childcare sector?
Well, I mean, the funding was the issue before we went into the crisis and left many providers in a tricky position before all this. So there has to now be a rethink on the distribution of that funding. Could we expect the pot to be bigger? I think that's unlikely, but is there a different, better way of distributing that funding? Possibly. I think there is. There's certainly an appetite on that, I believe, going forward.
Okay. And what about the government clarity furlough, funding meant for providers, etc., and the difficult decisions people are going to have to make?
Yeah, I mean, furlough and the complications around it, it's tricky. You know, thinking about flexible furlough and how are you actually going to do that requires real grey brain, you know, your grey cells to be working overtime. I don't think they've made it easy for people, and I think this is something that I've been really mindful of, which is where the collaboration of the sector has really helped. Is that I have the luxury of, you know, having a finance team, of having HR people that I can talk to, a marketing team, and we've all had to draw together to actually think our way through this. And for some single sites, you know, it must have been really draining trying to think through all the different areas of the business that they need to, you know, consider. So I think that's something that, you know, we've noticed as a sector probably, is how there is some real value in coming together and collaborating and sharing best practice, sharing ideas, sharing thoughts. That's, you know, I think that's important.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Ruth. If you just take a breather now, you've done 28 minutes of absolute gold-plated conversation there. I'm going to bring Jenna into play now. Jenna, thank you very much for waiting so patiently. Jenna, could you give us an overview, really, of obviously been back in the office since the 1st of June, worked through lockdown, but really where the sort of childcare buyer trends are at the moment?
Just in all honesty, it's so busy. Definitely increased inquiries has increased. You know, people like the lovely Ruth calling every week saying we need a chat, we need to understand where we're at, we need more acquisition. So that has 100% kind of completely changed. And I think more so since the easing of lockdown, that has then unlocked the viewings again. It's unlocked the valuations. So I think we were in a little bit of a delay period as such, just by easing those lockdown has then enabled other things to start flowing. I mean, in the last 3 weeks alone, just purely childcare, we've had 23 new offers in at just under 10 million in 3 weeks. So it is genuinely incredibly busy.
Good. Well, that's positive. Obviously, you know, we have all been impacted by this. Would you like to just cover off some of the situation with regards to the pipeline transaction?
Yeah, we have lost deals. We in total throughout the period have lost 3, which to be honest is incredibly low. And I think even regardless of COVID, you would never convert 100% anyway. So there hasn't been a major impact in deals being lost. What there have been are delays. And again, this has been down to valuations not going ahead, Ofsted obviously completely stopping, extra financial due diligence, and then obviously, you know, COVID due diligence coming into play as well. There has been a difference in the deal structures, so we have seen deferred come into play far more, and this is always predominantly linked back to occupancy, and on that returning to pre-COVID levels. But our clients, in all honesty, completely got behind it. They understand that the risk needs to be shared quite equally between buyers and vendors in this period, so they've been agreeable to it, which in turn has maintained multiples really.
So I guess obviously in terms of headline deals, and obviously we can't at this stage name names, but there's a group sale due to go through any day now, and then there's a large group sale due to go through in August. Is it fair to say that the cogs are starting to turn again?
Yeah, 100%. I think some buyers were back in play very, very quickly. I think people like Ruth and the larger groups took a bit longer, and I think understandably, because they've got so many of their own settings to kind of look after, and they've got to, you know, focus on them. But now everyone's starting to have those conversations again, so it's a big mix. Predominantly single site opportunities that we've sold recently and have completed on, but then, like you've just said, we've got, you know, two groups due to go, and everyone seems to be back in play and putting timescales back in. We've had some extensions to exclusivity, but they're kind of coming to October now and not really any further than that, so people really are trying to push these pipelines back through and not leave them to November, December.
And in terms of valuations post-COVID, how have you found them? Have there been delays in obtaining them? Have there been impact on values?
Not, I think, again, it depends on region. It depends on what is being valued. There was a complete stop on valuations taking place with certain banks, so that did hold the current transactions through, but then we have had some valuations back, and to be honest, they've been fairly what we expected them to be. There hasn't seemed to have been a significant drop due to COVID at all.
Good. Now, if you can just polish your crystal ball, what forecast and expectations do you have for the remainder of 2020?
I think deal activity will increase as occupancy kind of rises back to levels, and, you know, obviously noted what Ruth said, but I do think, you know, multiples will hold firm, and there are always going to be areas in low supply, and, you know, they will remain strong. I think deferred elements within offers, they will continue to protect obviously both clients, but overall the enterprise values I don't really see changing. There were a lot of clients we kind of spoke to back end of last year that were just getting to the point where they were a bit tired of the regulation changes, and I think once we're out of this part, that will be their ultimate chance just to probably come out of childcare altogether. But, you know, like Ruth said, September's key. Furlough is going to end the following month, so occupancy will start to drive up and start to recover.
Good. And a question for you, Jenna, from a lady with 2 nurseries who's thinking of selling, and she's asked, will buyers take account of the impact of COVID-19 when assessing my business, and what do I need to show to give buyers comfort that I am rebuilding towards my previous levels?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to, we've done a lot of packs, we've got a lot of information for clients, and we started this quite early, so we have a generic kind of COVID due diligence pack that a lot of the buyers are requesting. So it's understanding where your occupancy was, where it was during lockdown, and where you're forecasting that to be, you know. So like Ruth mentioned, having the family package, those nurseries that have got those packages where they can really track that occupancy and track that growth. And if you don't, you're going to have to start doing it manually, unfortunately, but you've got to be able to prove where you're going and you know, how you're mitigating that risk.
Good,
yeah,
thank you.
I think, can I just say, just to add to that, I think that the trend is going to be really important in that. So if you're beginning to see the trend of them coming back, you know, for us, that would be a really good marker that you know you would get getting back.
Ruth, is that trend as in physical children in the nursery, or does that include new bookings, new future bookings, etc.?
All of it. They said in unison, all of it. Yeah, I mean, you know, if you can see there's a volume of inquiries, even that's a really useful metric. So it's collating all that information, you know, and showing potentially, you know, even if they're booking for the next couple of years, if there is that interest, that's going to give confidence to a buyer that nursery is going to be there for the longer term.
Good. Okay, well, we're going to now move on to the questions that we've received. We've got time for a few questions still if anyone wants to submit them on the little question box. But just before we do that, I'd just like to do a little poll of people to see with regards to the webinars. Always useful to get some input in terms of what future topics people would like to see discussed. So on your screen is a little tick box. You can tick as many as you want. It doesn't have to be just one, but it will give me a flavour for what webinars I can put together in the future. So we'll just do that for another 3 seconds. 2, 1. Okay, and just going to close that one now. Thank you very much. And then another one. Some of you who've done the webinar before will know I launched an energy review business 6 weeks ago. We've saved over £80,000 per annum in gas and electricity prices for childcare businesses in the past 6 weeks. Very, very straightforward, free energy review, and obviously with the recent issues, oil prices, gas prices, energy prices are at an all-time low. Able to do future bids as well, so if you're not due for a renewal until Easter next year or summer next year, we can get your prices and future book them. So quick plug for that. So 3, 2, 1, thank you very much. Right, okay, questions, and we are starting with Ruth. Do the relaxing of the restrictions on the 20th of July mean that we can combine bubbles when numbers are low at the start of the and end of the day, and then separate into the separate bubbles as children arrive and numbers build up?
Okay, so this is one of those very specific type of questions which, without knowing the whole scenario about what other risk assessments are in place, it's really hard to give a definitive answer. That's my first point. But it goes back to what I think I said earlier on, which is you just need to have a view about how many children potentially and staff would be impacted in what you're aiming to do. So it's about using a bit of it's about thinking it through in using a common sense approach of how many children, how can you do it to limit the number of children that would be exposed, because it's in the worst case scenario that you need to consider what would happen. Would it mean that your whole nursery has to close, and how would you manage with that should there be an outbreak? So I think I think this is everybody's grappling with it. We're grappling with it within our own nurseries. How do you do that, and how much risk do you take on a site by site basis? And that's ultimately where you need to sort of pitch it in your head. But yeah, there is clearly the relaxing of the bubbles is to allow more movement, but how much you want that to be will be down to your own risk assessment.
Great, thank you. And the next question is for you as well. What impact has COVID-19 had on capacity within nurseries, as it is difficult to get what impact has COVID-19 had on capacity within nurseries, as it is difficult to get children to socially distance?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't get children to socially distance. So, I mean, that was all part of, looking at this right at the start, whereas there were those horror stories of, children in French playgrounds being defined a square and making them stay in a square. That was never going to work. So the important thing is reinforcing the social distancing with your adults, with your parents, with your visitors. I've kept the 2 meters. There was no point changing all the stickers and all the signs, because I still think 2 meters feels like a safe distance to keep adults apart. So that's how we've managed it at Kindred, made sure wherever possible we can keep adults and away from each other, but keep the children in the bubbles.
Good. And another question, is it a good time to expand the business with impending job losses?
Is that a question for me or Jenna? I think it's a question
for you first.
Is it a good time to we can't talk about job losses until we're clear what the occupancies are going to be. That's my first thought on that. Expanding the business, I mean, it's important for us that we continue to grow. I think one thing I'm clear of is that we're not going to stand still. I don't think standing still is an option. We've got to keep looking at everything slightly differently. We've got to be looking at our business models site by site and looking at those differently, and looking at where there are opportunities, whether that's looking at extensions, looking at outdoor, making more use of the outdoor space, or even potentially new starts in the right locations if they're fitting where your strategy is going, and acquisitions that fit within the areas that we would want to be. We're looking at it all. I think we've just got to keep open-minded in this. There are good things that will come out of this, and it's keeping your eyes open for those different opportunities.
Jenna, your thoughts on that?
Same. I think everyone kind of feels the same. I think at first it was, you know, how can we be seen to be deploying cash into acquisitions when, you know, we should be protecting the staff and the families, but fundamentally businesses need to grow and there will always be demand for childcare. So stopping now and not continuing on your expansion plans, and a lot of people have boards and private equity to answer to, and you know the whole point of that is to continue to grow, and that's not going to change, because you know everyone will continue to grow and do what they were set out to do in the first place.
Okay, brilliant. Well, that's our time. So Jenna, thank you very much. Ruth, thank you very much for you. You deserve a cracking break for the rest of today now after that.
Gin and tonic?
Gin and tonics all around. So thank you for everyone for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.